Welcome to the unit about information processing theory. This unit's lecture will be guided by the following questions. What are the key assumptions and concepts in information processing theory? What principles and implementation strategies align with information processing theory? And how do we approach assessment using information processing theory? Let's start with what are the assumptions and key concepts in information processing theory. I should also mention that this theory can also be referred to as information processing system or model. All refer to the same set of findings about the human mind in the context of learning and memory. As the first step, let's briefly review the history of psychology as it relates to learning and motivation. You may recall from your undergraduate or even high school classes that the first theory to emerge about human behavior was behaviorism. You may recall the famous Pavlov dog. Indeed, Pavlov published the results of an experiment on conditioning after originally studying digestion in dogs in 1897. Famous behaviorists were Watson and B.F. Skinner, names you may have heard if you took a psychology class. Based on behaviorism, we are basically seen as products of our environment. Behaviorism is often referred to as the theory about sticks and carrots, as a metaphor for the use of a combination of reward and punishment to induce a desired behavior. Behaviorism is primarily concerned with observable behavior, as opposed to internal events like thinking, and the goal of psychology, according to behaviorism, is to predict and control behavior. Famous behaviorist B.F. Skinner, in fact, argued that free will is an illusion. Behaviorism guided psychological research from the early 20th century into the 1950s. In 1950s, other psychological theories started to emerge, such as social cognitive theory. Social cognitive theory expands understanding of learning and motivation by emphasizing that the environment, the person, and the behavior influence each other. Social cognitive theory emphasizes the role of the environment and behavior, just like behaviorism, but also includes the person's beliefs and mental processes. It specifically focuses on the role of self-regulation, in contrast to behaviorism's focus on other regulation via the reinforcements and punishments or sticks and carrots. In social cognitive theory, self-regulation refers to an individual internally driving their behavior via goals, values, interests, self-efficacy, and other motivation-related beliefs. Today, we're going to take a look at a different perspective on learning that's commonly known as cognitive theory or cognitive learning theory or information processing theory. And we're going to take a look at how it provides a really different way of learning than what we talked about with behavioral and social cognitive frameworks. Note that in our model this week, there is no emphasis on behavior or environment, as we are focusing on the things that happen internally within the cognitive system. So as you can see, the environment and behavior boxes are no longer visible because this particular perspective doesn't place a lot of attention on that. It really tries to figure out how information gets processed while we're learning. This is a graphic representation of the information processing system. You see that there are three main units: sensory register or memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Needless to say, none of us has three boxes inside our heads. These boxes represent different functions of the human brain when it comes to information processing. It is also important to note that there is not one area of our brains that contains a specific memory store. For example, we know that the sensory memory includes our auditory processing areas in the temporal lobe and the visual processing areas in the occipital lobe. As imperfect as this figure is, it is a helpful tool for us to understand how information enters the cognitive system and what happens once it's there. Let's take a look at each component in more depth. So let's take a look at sensory memory. We have 5 senses that we all know about. We can hear, see, taste, touch, and smell. In reality, we have 2 more, kinesthetic and motion. So we in fact have 7 senses. So what happens to information in sensory memory? It is either moved into working memory or it is lost in a very short amount of time. This component is also referred to sometimes as register rather than memory because of the brevity of time that information stays there. In fact, if information is not moved into working memory within 0.5 to 3 seconds, it is lost. This also results in a lack of conscious awareness of the information that is passing through our sensory memory. Think about all the people, buildings, and objects you pass today on your way to work or elsewhere. All of the conversations you heard and activities that were taking place around you. All of these passed through your sensory memory, but most did not make it into your working memory. And this is a good thing, as otherwise you would be overwhelmed with processing the information around us. But how does information get into working memory? Let's take a look at that next. Those things that we attend to more carefully make it into working memory, which is what you might think of as our consciousness. So why do we attend to certain things more than others? Things that cause us to pay attention are stimuli that are intense, such as certain colors and sounds, stimuli that are large in size, such as headlines, stimuli that are surprising or incongruent with what we expect, such as someone wearing shorts and flip-flops in a professional setting, stimuli that are novel in that we have never come across anything like that before. I remember the first time I saw curling in Olympics as a incongruent, a surprising, a novel event. And we also pay attention to stimuli that are relevant for us, that are aligned with what we're interested in. For example, I love coffee, so any ads about a new flavor of coffee are more likely to catch my attention than ads for tea, beer, or even wine. Once we pay attention to certain stimuli, again, we enter them into what we're looking at now, our working memory. This is where we process things consciously and make meaning out of the information we attend to. Our working memory organizes information and makes inferences about it in order to make the new information meaningful. For example, we might compare something interesting we just came across with what we already know about the topic. That new flavor of coffee might be even better than the butterscotch toffee I discovered a few weeks ago, right? So I'm relaying the new information to information I already know. Working memory is where we decide which information we will attend to, which will be sent to long-term memory, and which information will be deleted or lost. The key to working memory is attention. Once we attend to information, we can think about it on a conscious level. Unfortunately, we can only think about 5 to 9 things at a time. And many experts, in fact, believe that the number is actually even lower. So our working memory has a very small capacity and a very short duration on top of that. And if information is not rehearsed or repeated, it only stays in our working memory for about 5 to no more than 15 seconds. And once new information is attended to, oftentimes something else happens, and the information is pushed out of our working memory, meaning that memory is lost. For example, You and a colleague might have been having an interesting conversation while finishing lunch when another group of people nearby caught your attention with their conversation about binge watching the same show you just started watching on Netflix. If you start to attend to their conversation, oftentimes your thoughts about your current conversation with your friend and colleague are pushed out of your working memory, and you cannot remember what was just said or what you were about to say. So again, there are 3 things that can happen to information in working memory. Information can be lost. If repeated or rehearsed, information can be kept in working memory, or information can be transferred to our long-term memory. So how do we transfer information into our long-term memory? We transfer knowledge into our long-term memory primarily via elaboration and organization. Those 2 are meaningful strategies that build connections to our prior knowledge and organize information in an orderly and clear manner into mental structures. We call these mental structures schemas. Rehearsal or rote learning, simply repeating information over and over again, can also work if we're learning very simple information. Many cultures learn the alphabet and the multiplication table by rote memorization, and it works. But rehearsal and rote memorization does not work well for complex information. However, the complex information is the type of information you are generally exposed to in your professional and certainly in your academic life. Long-term memory is integral to the definition of learning. One of the aspects of learning is that it is a multidimensional process that results in a relatively enduring change. So where does this change occur? In our long-term memory. If learning only stays in working memory as a result of repetition or rote learning, but then succumbs to memory loss, it does not meet the definition of learning. Current research findings tell us that the capacity and duration of long-term memory is infinite. In essence, we do not lose our memories in learning, but they may become very difficult to retrieve. I'm sure you can relate to the "it's on the tip of my tongue" phenomenon. There are some exceptions to the indefinite duration and capacity. Both of them are impacted in case of neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's. Having reviewed the structure of the information processing system, let's review the assumptions of cognitive approaches to learning. Based on research, we know that learning is facilitated when new information is connected to prior knowledge. There is a caveat, however, in that prior knowledge can help or hinder learning. Some individuals may possess inaccurate prior knowledge that can become a detriment to encoding new knowledge. There are some powerful misconceptions that are difficult to change. I'm sure you have come across some of them in your professional experience. We also know that learning is facilitated when new information is organized and refers to some kind of mental structure. We call those mental structures schemas. And again, schema is a cognitive framework that helps organize and interpret information. An example of a schema is your understanding of APA formatting as a framework of related knowledge, such as how to create accurate citations and headings. This understanding grows and changes over time as you deepen your understanding of APA formatting. We also know that learning is facilitated when the learner is actively involved in the learning process. So you cannot passively receive information and then expect it to result in long-term or deep and meaningful kinds of learning that you can effectively retrieve when necessary. We also know that there's a lot of information that comes into the cognitive system via sensory memory, but that we're very selective about what we attend to and, as a result, what we eventually learn. Remember, that the key to remember that the key to learning is attention. And finally, there's an element of constructivism in learning. The meaning that we attach to things that come into the cognitive system and that we process are really constructed by the individual in terms of what they perceive, what they attend to, and what sort of prior knowledge they have accumulated thus far. And those are all things that can result in slightly different interpretation of the same stimulus or the same environmental events, and would lead to different levels of learning. Now, let's shift to what principles and implementation strategies align with information processing theory. So on the screen here are principles derived from information processing theory. You will see that many of them directly address the limitation of our working memory. Note how these principles can be used to create learning, training, and development experiences and tasks that result in long-term meaningful learning. Please pause the recording and review each one carefully. The principles that were just presented are translated here into implementation strategies. You might find one that you can use in your professional practice immediately. Similarly to the last image, please pause the recording and review each one carefully. Finally, let's address how we approach assessment using the information processing theory. So how can you assess the learner's prior knowledge? Here are some ways. You can administer a diagnostic in the beginning that can be either low or even no stakes assessment as a way to simply understand prior knowledge and skills of your learners. You can also have individuals assess their own prior knowledge. You can create a list of concepts and skills they are expected to learn and have the learners assess their prior knowledge in the context of these concepts and skills. You might consider using group brainstorming to reveal prior knowledge. This brainstorming might uncover some beliefs, associations, and assumptions that you might need to be aware of as an instructor. Finally, as possible, you might look for patterns in prior work, if that is available, as this would help you identify potential misconceptions that need to be corrected. Remember, again, that prior knowledge can either support or hinder learning.